Hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you very much for joining us. This is the first of Claremont's new webinar format. We're calling it Bitesize, and the idea is that we are going to give you a little snapshot of one of the kind of themes or theories that we've been working with and we've been seeing a lot within our work. And then we're going to give you some practical things that hopefully you can take away and apply to your work. I'm Philippa Williams. I'm Strategy Director at Claremont. And this is Cynthia.
Nice to see you all. I'm a senior consultant here at Claremont. I come from a behavioral science and service design background. I'm really excited to delve into all the scientific literature that the team and I have been looking into, as well as this Fair for You case study that will give you some practical insights into how to apply this scarcity mindset as well.
Brilliant, thanks, Cynthia. Morning, nice to see you. The way in which we're going to do the webinar today is we're going to give you a bit of the background and the research, which Cynthia's going to share. I'm going to talk you through kind of designing for scarcity in practice, and then we've got some time for some Q&A. So we'd really love it as we go through if you can, one, share your name and where you come from, but also any kind of thoughts, comments or questions that you have. We're not going to answer them as we go, but we will have a decent chunk of time at the end to go through it. So I'm going to hand over to Cynthia in a second, but I suppose I just wanted to start by saying, like, why actually are we talking about scarcity today? And the reason that we wanted to do this webinar is that I think what we see in so many of the briefs that come to us and the work that we're doing is that so often scarcity is one of the core things that we have to consider and think about. So whether that is we're trying to get people to take up their vaccine, or whether we're trying to get them to think about dementia prevention in their 40s and 50s, whether we're trying to encourage parents to support their children's literacy development, etc. All of those people at times may be living in scarcity, be that financial scarcity, be that time scarcity, that kind of pressure of having a million one things to do, or emotional scarcity. And so what we wanted to do is sort of really highlight that challenge, but also to talk about what some of the things are that you can do to really design and think about kind of scarcity in mind. So that's what we're going to do today. Thanks very much for being here. I'm going to hand over to Cynthia.
Thank you, Philippa. So, some of you have already mentioned in the chat, you're very keen to learn about what the scarcity mindset is. So the big question, what is scarcity in itself? So scarcity is usually understood as having fewer resources than needed to meet someone's goals. So there's different types of scarcities that you can think about. So it can be a lack of various things. Think about time scarcity. So when you've got too many demands and not enough hours in a day to do whatever you want to do. Money scarcity is also a big thing. So lacking the financial means to survive. And this can be about not having enough savings or income to pay your bills, for example. But it can also be about not being able to access certain affordable credit. Health scarcity isn't just about a lack of energy or the capability to do something. It's also about not having enough access to physical or mental health care to do what you need to do in your day to day. And then last but not least, there's also social or emotional scarcity. And this is often seen when, I guess, someone is in isolation, there's a lack of this supportive network or social capital to support them. And there are certain demographics in the UK that are more vulnerable than others. So, for example, single parents tend to be more in financial scarcity. They have less time on their hands because they've got to juggle so many different things. People from ethnic minority communities, they often face certain socioeconomic disparities, or they might face certain health disparities as well. Gig workers and people in insecure work, they juggle between going from one job to the other, and also that time scarcity really. And then there's also disabled people and those with long-term health conditions, so they experience health scarcity. And all of these vulnerable groups, they share one common thread, or actually two. One of them is that they've got this consistent shortfall in critical resources, be it money, be it secure housing, time or support. But on the other hand, they also face these higher exposures to shocks such as job loss or sudden expenses and health issues without having a safety net in place a lot of the time. So all of this doesn't just make life so much harder, it can also affect our minds in a very strong way. So the more intense and the longer we experience any type of these scarcities, the more it affects us. When someone feels like they're constantly running out of time or money, for example, it can reduce what's called mental bandwidth. And this is basically the brain power or the cognitive resource you've got to plan things, to control your impulses, to solve problems, and also to make decisions. I'm sure that some of you in the audience might have experienced times where you've been very busy. Maybe you've been going through an illness, and because you're so focused on getting well, you can't really focus on any other things, such as thinking about your pension, for example, because that's just not on top of your mind right now. And this is because all of this mental strain causes what's called a tunneling effect. So this causes people to focus on the immediate concerns at the expense of other needs. So research has actually found that people who work part-time, for example, or freelance jobs, they often experience time scarcity and income anxiety. And this forces them into this mindset of taking just any job that comes whilst they are sick, maybe, or even if this job isn't the right job for them right now. They might even sacrifice rest as a result of this just to survive. And in that moment, it's really easy to understand why people would choose these jobs, even at the expense of other things. And because their minds are so heavily occupied by concerns about next week's work bills, for example, or whether they've got time to do certain things in the day, even simple things like chores, doing the laundry, this means that they will have less bandwidth to focus on other things that are important in life. Now, how does this then show up in real life? There's three effects that we found in the academic literature. First of all, this cognitive strain and emotional distress that I've already alluded to. Secondly, the use of mental shortcuts or cognitive biases. And lastly, avoidant behavior. So when I talk about increased cognitive strain and emotional distress, what do I really mean? In some of the literature that I found, we found that this lack of time and money can influence people's decision making. So there is one famous research study with Indian sugarcane farmers, and they tested their ability to do certain cognitive tasks before and after harvest. So before harvest, these Indian sugarcane farmers tend to have less money, and a few weeks after, they tend to have a little bit more because they've just done their harvest. So when they were asked to do these thinking tests, actually what these researchers found was that their IQ scores were more than 10 points lower before harvest compared to after. And this is really typical of financial scarcity, but also affects our emotions. So people on lower incomes, for example, also experience emotional distress more intensely than wealthier peers. And this is not because they feel like they don't have any financial buffer to rely on if something were to go wrong. It's because they don't have any sense of safety. And this is not just about time as well. So when people feel constantly rushed, overloaded, or pressed for time, their mental bandwidth that I just spoke about shrinks. And this time poverty can really impair their decision making and increase stress at the same degree as financial stress, really. Secondly, I was talking about mental shortcuts just now. So when we have less bandwidth, we tend to rely on what's called mental shortcuts, or also known as cognitive biases. What's really important to know here is that as humans, we tend to use these mental shortcuts all the time because it just makes life easier and you don't have to heavily consider every decision that you're making every single day. But for people experiencing scarcity, this becomes even more acute. So some of the mental shortcuts include present bias, which is really our tendency to focus on the here and now rather than future benefits. And the further away rewards are, the less we really value them. So for example, when we're thinking about pension again, opting for a lower pension percentage right now might be more desirable for some people because that means they can have money every month, more money every month, rather than having more pension later in their lives. Status quo bias is also something that comes up a lot for people with scarcity. So this is when we tend to stick with default options because it takes too much mental effort to change these, even if it could benefit us. And then there's also loss aversion. So we are often more motivated by the idea of avoiding losses rather than gaining something. So if you were asked to make some financial decisions with a time limit, you will probably try to be more risk averse and choose safer options of investment, for example, over doing something that's more risky. And then lastly, avoidant behavior. So scarcity can lead people to bury their heads in the sand, like the ostrich effect, is that something called. So when it comes to money, some people may avoid opening bills because this can make them feel a little bit uncomfortable because they know they will have to face unpleasant emotions as a result of it. And when it comes to health, those who are constantly juggling multiple responsibilities, they will focus less on their health simply because they don't have the mental bandwidth to do so. So this might mean postponing their annual dental checkup or not going to a doctor's appointment because they are so focused on the here and now. All of this scientific literature isn't just something that we found in laboratories. It's something that we found in real life as well. And that's something that Philippa will now talk about.
Thanks so much, Cynthia. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some work that we did with a client called Fair for You, and our client Chris is on the webinar right now, and he said to me, "No pressure." So I'm taking that to heart as I go through. Who are Fair for You? They are an ethical lender who support people who are financially vulnerable. If you are interested in financial vulnerability, I would strongly recommend that, and you don't know about Fair for You, I'd strongly recommend that you take a look at their work. It's really is kind of, you know, leading in that class. Fair for You's model is all about kind of supporting people when they are those who are financially vulnerable, particularly when they're experiencing kind of bumps in the road that can then lead to crisis. So part of their model, for example, is that they will support people to buy white goods, for example, and then pay that off at a kind of low cost rate. One of the challenges that and Fair for You have a lot of things in place that are about supporting people when they are when they're struggling to pay, for example. So they're a really responsible lender. And what they were experiencing was that when people were unable to pay, that people were kind of completely disconnecting and disengaging from them. And the challenge with that is that obviously if you don't pay, then that massively impacts your credit score. And then in the future, that would then impact your ability to get additional credit, etc. And also, because Fair for You is a different type of lender, what they could do is support people in different ways. So they could give people payment holidays, they could switch them to a different type of payment. They could, so really what they wanted was for people to just stay with them, to keep engaging with them, to get in touch so that they could be able to support them more effectively. And so really what we felt is that there was so much kind of going on for customers who are financially vulnerable, but are also then in a position where they're not able to pay. So they're kind of financially vulnerable, and then clearly they're in a position where they're experiencing the kind of impact of scarcity. And I'll talk you through some of that in a bit more detail in a moment. But I think also part of our hypothesis was that it's likely that people who are financially vulnerable may have had poor debt experiences previously. So they may have experienced kind of unsafe behaviour from a lender. They might have experienced kind of, you know, a huge amount of pressure from their lenders, etc. And so part of what we needed to do was to help to sort of change their perception of what a lender could be, so that when they were in those moments of scarcity and that kind of avoidant behaviour kicked in, that they actually sort of chose to turn towards the lender rather than away. And that was sort of like the core thinking behind our strategy. The process that we took was we looked a lot at the kind of what does the research and the insight talk about for us here, and then also looked at kind of qualitative research, and then developed a new set of communications that we then ran through testing. What I'm going to talk to you about now is how we found that insight, applied that insight, and then the sort of takeouts that I think are applicable to other pieces of work. So what was part of the solution? Well, as is the point of this webinar, really thinking about what is scarcity doing to people who are kind of within this financial, who are both financially excluded, but are also likely to experiencing other elements of scarcity. So, for example, they could be experiencing health scarcity, emotional scarcity, and also experiencing that kind of time scarcity as well. So, as Cynthia's already talked about, these are some of the things that really happen when you're experiencing scarcity, that avoidant behaviour. So, the bills are coming through, the emails are coming into my inbox. I'm just going to kind of push that to one side because I've got more important things that are going on. Kind of going back to that sort of default, so the need for us to be able to have very kind of simple options for people to engage with, and then the really significant cognitive bandwidth that people are experiencing. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about some of those behavioural factors that are particularly involved in financial capability. So the cognitive overload, as Cynthia mentioned, what that can make people feel is, when you're receiving information that might be talking about, the actions that you need to take to help you to repay, it can just feel like there's too many options here. It feels too difficult. I'm just going to deal with that later and kind of put it to one side. We also see kind of an optimism and overconfidence bias. So that's, I believe that I will be able to make payment, and before I default, and I don't need to engage with this now. Like I kind of believe that will be okay. Next week when I get paid, I'll be able to deal with that. Also a sense of kind of present bias. So as kind of Cynthia's talked about, but really applicable here in that, I don't really see any benefits of engaging right now. So I'm going to wait till a little bit later. I'm going to deal with the things that are right in front of me. And then getting into some more of the kind of design elements, the importance of that sort of salience. So if the information feels really crowded, if it's difficult to know what the kind of key thing is that I'm meant to do, I'm just going to try and avoid it. And then the sort of last point, which really cuts across all of the kind of different elements of scarcity, is like I'm in the middle of doing other stuff, like I'm in the middle of working or childcare or caring or cooking the tea or do all of these other things, and I just don't have time for this right now. And we saw all of those kind of elements really in our analysis and our kind of quant work as we were kind of going through. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about that we saw in the literature, and I think it was really kind of key within the work, is a point around compassion. So what we saw in some of Fairview's previous comms and that we've seen in other work is that often when we're trying to work with people that we know are experiencing difficult times, what we can try to do is sort of display empathy, and that comes from a really good place. We want to say that I can put myself in your shoes and I can understand the problems that you're facing. The big challenge of that is that inherently there is a kind of power imbalance here, and what that sitting within that empathy space can do is sort of make people turn off, because it's that sense of like, how can you possibly know what it's like to be me right now? How can you possibly know about the impact that I'm facing? I like to sort of think about it in the way of, if you're ever having a problem, you might have a type of friend who will say, oh yeah, me too, and then just go into the problem that they're facing that they think is really similar. But you might have a different type of friend who doesn't try and tell you their problem, but says, okay, I can't possibly understand how hard that must be. What can I do to help you? How can I help you make this a little bit better? And that's compassion. And our sense, and what we've seen from this work, is that sitting in that compassion space, like, I recognise what's going on. I know this must be really hard. I can't try and imagine how difficult that must be, but let me help you. Together we can help to find a solution. I can do something practical to help you. And that's very much where we focus the communications for Fairview, and I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. But it much more acknowledges that inherent power balance that all of us probably within this call, when we're trying to communicate with people, have within our space. So where we got to was that our sense was that this these collections communications, the communications plan that we were developing had to do 4 things. It had to be compassionate. And in this context, that was about saying, we can help you to find a solution here. There are options that we can help you with to get you into a different payment space. Secondly, we can get to a point was about empowerment. And in a lot of the literature that talks about kind of financial capability, that belief that you are able to manage your money is quite important. And we felt that it was really important that, going back to the strategic point of, trying to shift perceptions of what a lender could be, is that the voice of Fairview and the kind of communications needed to have a sense of belief. Like, we believe that you'll be fine. We believe that you'll be able to pay. We believe you'll be all right. You just need a bit of help to get there. The third thing, which really comes back to a sort of design point, is about simplicity, clarity, and making things really easy. So the need for us to design the communications in a way that was very simple, where the actions were very, very clear, where we were very clear on what the specific action is for this communication, where the options were clear, and where it was really easy to navigate. And then fourthly is safety. There are consequences of not paying, and there's also deadlines for not paying, right? And so what we felt we needed to do within these communications is really balance urgency with support. So and kind of pillowing that sense of urgency, to make sure that we were giving the consequences of not paying were really clear to people, but equally they were always supported with messages and a general tone that was about support. So those are kind of 4 principles, and this is what they look like in practice. So this was the kind of first email communication that we sent, and you can see hopefully one for the design, which I'll talk about in a minute, but also in terms of the language that we're using, that it was very much about trying to get to that compassionate space. So there's sort of a recognition of the challenges. We couldn't collect the latest repayment on your loan. That's okay. These things happen, but it's quick and easy to get back on track. And then real clarity on what the sort of supportive actions are, which is the second box. So, you need to change your payments. These are the things that you can do, and this is the action that you need to take. Simplicity, clarity, and making it really easy. So the design was made to be quite clean. It's very simple language. The information that you need, so like the information about your balance, where you are in the payment cycle, etc., is kind of given to you really quickly, and there's a very single-minded action within, which is about requesting an affordable plan, and that was to kind of get you to have that conversation and get back in touch. It's right at the bottom here, but what happens next, that's giving people the kind of real sense of, like, this is where you are in the process, the consequence, but again, it being kind of pillowed after the positive actions that you can take. Empowerment. So we included very championing language, which we tested multiple times. I had a bit of a like, is this a bit cheesy? Is this a bit? But actually it tested incredibly well in our live qualitative testing. That kind of sense of, like, let's fix this together. We believe that you can get back on track. We're here to help you. We're here to support you. And also this kind of sense of personalisation. So requesting an affordable plan for you, the fact that the customer experience team were named within the email, it felt just much more personal and much more engaging. And then safety. So one of the things you'll see in the kind of design itself is that the imagery is quite soft. We had photography options in here when we did our kind of A/B testing, and it is this kind of cartoon effect that people really liked, and they had this real sense of that it felt very soft, it felt very supportive. We also had language like, we're on your side, that kind of sense of, we're here to help you, and that the consequences are very clear, but they're non-threatening. So if you don't get in touch, this is what's going to happen, but we're here and we can support you through that. The thing that I would say about those kind of four options that I talked about earlier is that they are really used to support on, they're really based on the East framework, which if you're not familiar with, I'd hugely recommend. But as always with East, it's about taking that and then applying it to your context, which is where we then came up with those kind of 4 points. So just to kind of summarize, really, I think if I was to say, like, what are the things you need to really bear in mind when you're thinking about working with people who are experiencing scarcity, of any of the scarcity that Cynthia talked about earlier, the first one is, I would say, is that we're not their priority. Our actions, our service, our whatever we're trying to do is just not the thing for them that is consuming them and that is front of center in their minds at that time. And that doesn't mean that what we've got isn't really beneficial and supportive and could really help them, but we absolutely are not their priority. And so the mindset that we need to get into is thinking, how can we make this as simple, as clear, and as safe as possible for people to do? How can we give them enabling actions to kind of get from where they are at this point to then being able to get into where we want them to be? And also, how can we really in our communications have that sense of empowerment sort of front and center within our thinking? Conscious we've gone through a lot this morning. We've got a new report that really summarises and goes into much more detail what Cynthia was talking about this morning, and then and it also goes into the Fair UK study in more detail, but also some other pieces of work. Please download it. It's I mean, we're biased, but we think it's a really good read, and it should give you lots of the things that we talked about this morning. And now we should have about 4 minutes left to answer any of your questions. Cynthia.
Yes, we actually got one question from Heidi. So how did you go about changing their perceptions to engage with lenders? I'm assuming that compassionate language and also building trust in some way was a big part of it, right, Philippa?
Yeah. So I think I suppose we started from the point of options. So, the thing that we needed, like the single thing that we needed to communicate was stay in touch. We can help you to get to a different plan, really. So really single-minded in that communication and being really clear with like Chris and the team were really great at through our workshopping getting to a point of that clarity. Secondly, kind of designing with that sense of safety and compassion in mind. And we tested. So we had multiple iterations that we ran in an A/B test with customers and got their feedback, and then we did a randomized control trial. So we kind of were confident within that. So those principles, but then also really testing.
Thanks, Philippa. I don't think there are any more questions.
I think we just got one come through.
Oh, there's one more that just came in. Yeah, so Jeffries is asking, Rachel Jeffries is asking, how are these practices effective with a younger cohort, like vulnerable children or teenagers, if you want them to engage with interventions, for example?
So I think what I would say is the principles apply, right? So the principles of what happens when you're experiencing stress, what happens when you're experiencing those you're experiencing that kind of emotional strain. I think that what we would then say is you then need to do like we did in this work, you then need to then think about doing the kind of qualitative work that allows you to then take that theory and apply it within those specific cohorts, because it will be different depending on what it is that you're trying to kind of sort of communicate around. But that sense of safety, simplicity, ease, and kind of reducing the bandwidth for them, I think is really important.
I think we've got many more questions about the case study. So was scarcity mindset a starting point, or was that more something that you found out throughout?
So we knew that scarcity was probably going to be crucial, I think, before we went into it, and then through the kind of literature, etc. We it kind of became like really front and center, and then through the testing that kind of really reaffirmed it. So what we saw is that for people, that kind of sense of simplicity, but also that sense of compassion, were really the kind of core things that came out of the kind of testing phase as being fundamental.
And then quickly as a last question, Ellis asked, do you think this approach could be used with a campaign context with people eligible for state support, income support, and social care? And I think definitely, like I said in the chat, scarcity can affect anyone at any time, but it also affects some people more than others, especially those who are in financial scarcity. And I think that's all for now. And no more questions. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. Do download the report or pass it on to anyone who might be interested.
And thanks very much for having us. If people, if there are other questions that we haven't got to, we'll come back to you following the session. And do keep an eye out for future bite-sized sessions from Claremont and download the report. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your days. Bye.
Okay, see you.